Berks' League of Women Voters presents. Tonight we're talking about the census, the U.S. Census. We've all answered the questions. We're now getting back the information, and we're going to learn tonight how this affects us right here in the Reading area, in Berks County, and across Pennsylvania. So it'll be an exciting evening. My guests tonight include, in no particular order, Carol Kunaholm, who's with Fair Districts PA, which is the group that's most concerned about making sure that voters choose whom they elect rather than the people who are in office choosing who will vote for them. And we have with us Isabel Monterosa. Isabel is currently with iLead, but she was with Albright College and the Center for Excellence in Government. And she's the person who really increased the turnout for the census and really got people ready to fill out their forms. So we're well counted here in Berks. We also have Tony Solis Cruz, and he's with MALDEF, which is a legal and educational forum that's working on the redistricting question and making sure minority populations are adequately represented so that they are not locked out of participation in their own government. And we have Patricia Vasquez, and she is with the City of Reading. She's in the Community Development Liaison. And both she and Isabel worked on our Complete Count committee here for Berks County. And we also have Michael Galimbeski, who is a planner in the planning department at the County of Berks. He does transportation modeling, but he was also on the Complete Count committee, and he's the one who has the numbers for us tonight. So Mike, tell us, are we growing? Are we shrinking? What's happening in Berks County?
Good evening, everybody, and thank you. We are definitely growing in Berks County, as is all of southeastern Pennsylvania. Most of the state may have lost population or grew very slowly, but southeastern Pennsylvania is where it's happening right now. What I'd like to do is share a presentation that I gave to the county commissioners back in October, and we'll show some of these numbers and tell you what we have. There we go. As we all know, we do the census because it's constitutionally mandated, specifically for congressional reapportionment. It's taken every 10 years. Unfortunately, as we know, in 2020, COVID hit and kind of threw things into a bit of a disarray. This now only does what they call a short form. There are only 10 questions that are asked, and you can see on the screen what is asked. All the other information that used to be asked, those of us who are old enough to remember the old long form, it was 40 pages of income and about your house and how you got to work. That's now relegated to the American Community Survey. That doesn't come from the decennial census anymore. There have been two major releases so far from the decennial census. The apportionment results, which is used to determine the number of representatives every state gets in the House, was released on April 26th. That was actually 4 months late. It was due on the president's desk December 31st of 2020. What we're going to talk about tonight, however, what we call the PL 94-171 file. That is the information that is actually used for legislative redistricting. It was released August 12th. That should have been released April 1st of this year. So that is a little bit late as well. We get some basic information, but we get it at a very, very fine level of detail. The rest of the information that we get from the census, we get more detail, but at higher geographies. All we know is it's coming next year. The Census Bureau is not even telling us when because they honestly don't know. They're that far behind. What we're talking about tonight is that legislative redistricting file. Very basic information. Total number of persons broken down by race, by Hispanic or Latino, or not Hispanic Latino. The same information for the voting age population, 18 years and over. We get what is known as group quarters population for those in the prisons, nursing homes, dormitories. That was never released with this file before, so this is the first time that's out. And then we also get total number of housing units and whether they're occupied or vacant. No other detail, no other information. This is what we have to work with. I was speaking earlier about how Berks is doing in relation to southeastern Pennsylvania. What you can see here is how we are compared to the rest of the counties that surround us. As you can see, the percentage change from 2000 to 2010, everybody was growing rather quickly and Berks was right up there. What has happened though is even though we're growing, that growth has slowed down. 4.1%. I can tell you for decades and decades prior to 2020, we were growing at between 9 and 10% per decade. So we've really slowed down. Schuylkill County, our one county to the north, our neighbor, they have been consistently losing population. I just threw this in here to show some general trends. The county as a whole has continued to grow. There we go. However, the city, this line here on the bottom, 1930 hit its peak at over 111,000 persons. In 1980, only down to 78,000. Have been coming up slowly since 1990 and again this decade. Here we have it on some numeric detail from 78,300 people in the city up to over 95,000. Countywide in Berks, you can see how we've been growing consistently. Yes, slowly this past decade, but still consistent growth. Where is that growth occurring? Well, number one, we look at this in a number of different ways. Who are our largest municipalities by total population? As you can see, obviously, the city with over 95,000 and those first inner ring suburbs, Spring, Exeter, Muhlenberg, Qumran. Spreading out a little bit more, Amity, Wyomissing. And now we're starting to see some areas that used to be rural, Maiden Creek, South Heidelberg, Robinson Townships, where we have seen a lot of housing growth in the last couple decades. Where has that growth been occurring? What we've seen is the big boys keep getting bigger. Reading, Muhlenberg, Spring, Amity. Now what we're seeing again, some of those more formerly rural townships now becoming suburbanized. Bonawani, Lower Heidelberg, Washington Township, surprisingly, in the Boyertown or north of Boyertown. On the flip side, who's declining? Our two largest with declining growth, Kutztown and Maxwell Township. I haven't looked at these numbers yet in more detail. I fully suspect that is due to the Kutztown University population being at home. Since a lot of those student apartments are in both the borough and the township. That is my suspicion, but I have to wait for more detailed numbers to quantify that. But what we're seeing in general, rural areas losing population, more suburban and urban areas gaining population. When we look at it by percentage growth, that tends to be more of an indicator of a demand for services. More rural areas now becoming very suburbanized. Bonawani Township, right up there. Adamstown Borough. We have to include Adamstown Borough because part of it is in Berks County. Now, yes, 5 people is not a lot, but if that's a larger indicator of the entire borough, it shows the borough is growing. And again, a lot of our some of our formerly rural areas becoming more suburbanized. Jefferson Township, Washington, Lower Heidelberg. And again, the flip side, who's been declining by those large percentages? New Morgan Borough. This one is interesting because we've got the youth detention facility down there. When they're not at a full capacity, that does affect the borough's numbers. Centerport Borough, Kutztown Borough, Maxwell Township. Again, that Kutztown University population, I suspect, is playing a large role there. In general, out of our 73 municipalities, we had growth in roughly 2/3 and declines in roughly 1/3. And most of those declines were in the suburban and rural boroughs and the rural townships. Changing tack a little bit, looking at race and Hispanic origin between 2010 and 2020. Have this broken down by both the county and the city specifically. You can see the total population growth, but what's interesting, let's go to the other side here. Growth in Latino population, both in the county and in the city, rising significantly. And without showing you every individual municipality, I can tell you that 5 municipalities lost Hispanic population, all of the others gained. So that growth is happening countywide. When we look at the race information, now race does include the Hispanic or Latino. Remember, that's a national origin where race is, it's race. What is interesting is you see the decline in Caucasians. Part of that is increasing diversity. And part of that, I believe, and a lot of demographers believe, starting in 2000, you could actually check some other race or multiple races on your census form. With people now recognizing their heritage and the fact that they may have more mixed heritage, plus with more mixed marriages happening, that is leading to a potential decline in, well, not potential, it can be seen, a decline in your Caucasian populations. Looking at Latino specifically, you can see that growth has been occurring consistently countywide and in the city. 69% Latino in the city of Reading. We look at age. This file specifically gives us under 18 and 18 and over, the voting age population. The notable thing that we've seen here is, especially countywide, a decline in the under 18 population and in the city as well, which is surprising. However, look more so at the percentages. The proportion of younger people has been declining in Berks since 2000, whereas a proportion of older people is increasing. What does this mean? One, a need for services for the elderly coming up. This is going to have impacts on our workforce. As more people retire and leave the workforce, we don't necessarily have the same supply of younger people coming in. One other effect that this has is on our school districts. We look at the number of total persons under 18, not necessarily all going to these schools. Remember, you've got parochial schools in here, you have other private schools, but in general, 13 out of 19 school districts lost student age population. If you've been around Berks County for the last couple of decades, you remember how school districts were going on building sprees. Everybody was adding buildings. Now, all of a sudden, what do they do with all that space? So that's going to be something for school districts to wrestle with. We look at households. The census defines a household as an occupied housing unit. It's that simple. The number of households in the county has continued to increase. They were actually declining in the city for 3 decades. Now all of a sudden shooting right back up again, which we found interesting. However, the households themselves are not getting any larger. Especially the county's kind of leveled off, and the city, a slight decrease in the housing size, or the size of the household. And that's simply a measure of the number of persons divided by the number of households. That's simple. This could be an indicator of people staying single longer, not as many marriages, people putting off childbearing and having fewer kids. Again, those are indicators we have not received yet. When we get those, that'll be information for more digging for us. And then we look at the total housing units. Again, whether they're occupied or they're vacant. Total number of units in the county increased, but if you look, we went up almost 14,000 up through 2000, about another 14,000 between 2000 and 2010, and then only about 6,000 up to 2020. Housing growth, as well as the population growth, leveled off in the county. In the city, you can see that was kind of level and then all of a sudden shooting up. Right there's an indicator of the number of conversions that we've seen. Now, on the flip side, the number of vacancies, you can see they were increasing in the city for 3 decades, and then all of a sudden, boom, the bottom fell out in the number of vacancies. County, just within the last decade, number of vacancies has dropped. Here is your housing market right now. And you can see properties are selling, they're not sitting long, they're not vacant. Right there is your housing market. What's going to be coming up next from the census? Again, I said at the very beginning, we'll be getting more detail, more subjects at different levels of geography. The Census Bureau also releases special tabulation areas, they call them, for certain geographies, congressional districts, zip codes, school districts, tracts, block groups, things like that. We redefine what is urban versus what is rural. In my line of work, that has implications for transportation funding. If a highway is in an urbanized area versus a rural area, different pots of money become available for them. And then, of course, the American Community Survey, that is an annual survey that comes out. The information is collected monthly, nationwide. It's released in 1 year and 5 year increments. I tried to keep that as quick as I could. If anybody has any questions, or Judith, you want to move on, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought that was fascinating information, and we're going to have to, I mean, there are all kinds of issues that a community has to grapple with when these numbers change. So I'm wondering, for the city, Patricia, what is it going to mean that's different that you're going to be doing? And we'll ask Isabel to talk about that as well, and Michael, at the county level. What things happen that are different because those numbers have changed? Different programs for vacant housing, different programs to build housing, transportation changes, but we don't know, we didn't get the information on who's commuting how far to work yet. That'll come later, so we can't do that part. Tell us what things are going to be impacted here.
Hi, Judith. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I feel honored to be here. I've met most of these individuals, including Isabel, Michael, and yourself. So it's good to see you all. We haven't seen the true impacts of the census as of yet, because it's very soon. But we do anticipate seeing changes, of course, in the housing stock, because there's more people in the city. But most importantly, I know we're going to touch base on that, but the redistricting. I believe we lost 1 seat in the state of Pennsylvania, and all those things are taken into account. But we certainly tried to have everyone educated in the subject, and we did our very best to have everyone counted.
And we know that there's federal funding that comes, and some of it comes through the city and some of it comes through the county. Anybody can talk about what the new numbers mean to us? Will we get less because the counties around us grew more, or will we be getting more because we have more people?
Good question. I think, well, there's a dollar amount. I think Isabel's more familiar with that, of how much funding we receive per person. So, of course, from the city's perspective, because the population grew from 2010, from 88,000 to 95,000, of course, we saw an increase there. Not the increase we'd like, but there's definitely an increase. So we will be receiving some more funding. I know Isabel and probably Michael can help with that mathematical calculation.
Well, yeah, Mike would always give me the statistics. I would just push out the importance of it. So I'll defer to Mike for that one.
The numbers that we used are roughly $2,100 per person per year for the next 10 years. That is a nationwide number based on the total amount of federal funding that is out there versus the total population. The question about whether you get more or less is what gets distributed around the country. Yes, Berks County grew. Yes, this city grew. So in total, we should get more funding. However, the nation as a whole grew. So will that same pot of funding increase proportionally? We don't know. If the pot stays the same, it has to get distributed among more people. So the question then becomes, if we're getting less, how much less? If we're getting more, how much more? Again, same pot of money, more people to give it to. So obviously that's going to change your math.
And we all know that this money coming to us is money that's been raised through our taxes. So it's our money coming back. But that speaks to something the league is very passionate about, and that's having everybody involved in this experiment of self-governance, and more people who contract their Congress people and say, we need the funds, so make sure the pot is big enough. That makes a difference. Isabel, what did you find when you were pushing out that message of it's important to fill out the census? Did you find people cared enough to want to participate?
That was part of our biggest challenge. And as Mike mentioned, in the midst of it all, COVID hit. And so literally we shut down. We had a whole host of outreach strategies planned. And as March went through, we saw each of them getting canceled to the point where we shut down. And although that created a big challenge for us, it did allow us some additional time. And I will say that I am grateful for that, because the census was supposed to be the month, April 1st was Census Day. But obviously we were shut down. So the field operations couldn't go through during that time. So we had to switch everything from an in-person outreach strategy to a digital strategy, which meant all of us had to get educated quickly on using these types of platforms. Our meetings changed from in-person to all electronic. And then we had to find ways to get to those partners in a restricted way. What we did learn is there was some hesitancy. There was a lot of messaging even beforehand that there was some concern over questions with the census. So we had to get through that hurdle first about the citizenship question. Once that was removed from there, it allowed us to promote it in different ways. But what we did find out, and Patricia and Mike can, attest to this, is that we really need to secure and cement our partners, our local partners at every level, to buy in on the message as early as possible, so that it could be something that is expected to be done because it benefits the community, and not something that is a hassle. Who are these people that are going to come around? It's more so a level of excitement. And one thing that I learned, even though we had extra time, is I really feel that it should be something that should be planted much sooner. We got on board around 2019. But even that, we've had talks about maybe at the 5-year mark, starting to do some promotion about it. Hey, it's 2030 is going to be coming up soon, and then start the momentum sooner. And now I think with these statistics, we can provide more information over the importance of it.
And I was thinking too that, go ahead.
I was going to say, we should put in a shameless plug here when we talk about community partners. BCTV was a huge community partner on the Complete Count Committee.
Yes, absolutely. She ended up becoming a committee of one because all the other partners were dropping out for a variety of reasons. So by the end, Heather was the outreach and the communications committee, and she did. I don't think we could have reached as many people. It was a great expert. So thank you, Mike, for that not so shameless plug.
I'm just going to want to share with our viewers that everyone who's here, who is Latino, who is coming from Puerto Rico, has been a citizen since the 1930s, because that's when Puerto Ricans became citizens. So there should have been no hesitancy with that population, and yet we know there was some. So when you talk about starting earlier, I think we do that, and we combine it with other civic duties like registering and voting. My personal view is we should have a welcome wagon kind of format, that everywhere you go, there's a person who comes to your house and says, this is how you register to vote. The census is coming up in this many years. We need you to join in and be part of our community. A welcoming thing that says these are the responsibilities. So we'll see if that makes any progress. At the moment, it's just an ideal, but the league really feels that if we don't, all of us, each of us, participate in our government, we're giving up on the idea of self-governance. And that's why it's very important that we all do all those things. Tony, from your view, do you find there is participation of minority populations in the redistricting process? Are people interested? Are they concerned? Or
Well, I'm certainly not a statistician. Good evening, everyone. But I do know that there is speculation that there have been undercounts of the Latino community. Like you were saying, it has to do with the level of concern that folks feel. It also has to do with a general potential mistrust with government. It has to do potentially because people feel like even though they're lifting and using their voices, the funding that Mike is talking about may not necessarily reach these specific communities. So there's this, of course, I mean, there's a plethora of reasons that could be informing these undercounts that you're talking about, or the lack of participation. But there's definitely not one specific thing. And yeah, I mean, I would say in my community as well, right? Like there were people who were hesitant to fill out the census. And you talk also about the fact that the Trump administration wanted to include a citizenship question. And of course that, you know, raises a huge red flag to the Latino population overall, but specifically also to people with an immigrant background.
And I should also note that when the Constitution was designed, slaves who were not considered citizens were counted. And they've always been counted. Now, how you could say that a person was 3/5 of a person boggles my mind, but that is how it was set up. So we have always counted the people who were here, whether, and in the case of the slaves, it was not by their own free will, but many of our immigrants here today are here by their own free will. And we've always counted that population. That population is important when we're divvying up the money, when we're divvying up the representation. So we have always done that. But I think there has been more fear in more recent years of participating because people do not feel they have that citizenship. And so that means we need a better plan for citizenship as well. One of the side issues, I guess, here, that would maybe another future league program, we can talk about that. Carol, from the Fair District's perspective, can a district be fair if it doesn't represent the diversity of the people who live there? You need to unmute. You're still muted. There you go.
Yeah, a district needs to represent the people who live there. And I guess part of it might be helpful for Tony to just tell us a little bit about redistricting and how it works and why it matters. He's got a wonderful illustration of districts need to be drawn really carefully so that communities can be heard. And that's a really important part, but it might be helpful for Tony to kind of give a little background on that. And then maybe we could talk a little bit about what a fair district might be and how this data is incredibly important when we start drawing those districts.
Tony, you have some slides to show us. The first one is a beautiful picture of a cake. I know that.
I'm gonna go
Makes
a
me
little.
hungry every time I look at it.
I'm gonna go a little bit faster because, of course, Mike has shared a bunch of wonderful information about how this works. But just to reiterate, at a very in the simplest way possible, right? Just what happens with the census and why exactly it's super important. Everyone is counted, right? And as was said earlier, like there's a legal mandate, right, Judith, that one person has the opportunity to have one vote, right? One person, one vote, which has consistently been solidified by the courts that is in fact inclusive of all people who reside in the US regardless of their citizenship status, which is an extremely important point to kind of note here. So once the census data is collected, of course, the statisticians plug and chug all that data, and then they share it with states and with counties and with municipalities so that the redistricting process can kind of go underway. Again, Mike has already given a bunch of amazing numbers and statistics. And I want to share and reiterate a little bit specifically about the Latino community in the state of Pennsylvania. In the 2010 census, the Latino community was only about 5.7% of the overall state. And now there's over 1 million Latinos present residing in the state of Pennsylvania, which is now 8.1%. Right. Another impressive statistic specifically for Latinos we grew in the state by 329,955 people, while the non-Latino population actually declined by about 29,634 people. So overall, in the state of Pennsylvania, Latinos made up 110% of the growth. Why is it over 100%? Why is it that funky number? Because not only did Latinos alone make up the entire growth for the state, but we also made up the deficit in the overall declining of the non-Latino population in the state, the overall non-Latino population in the state. So what is redistricting, as Carol was saying, is when we are redrawing political boundaries, both at the municipal level, at the state level, at the federal level, et cetera. When we redraw these political boundaries, that's what we call redistricting. And who is included in this? Everyone. Again, regardless of citizenship status, regardless of where you come from, right? Even if you were born in Chicago and you now live in Pennsylvania, in Reading, for example, you are included specifically in the count for Reading and in that specific redistricting process. A very important thing, and I'm sure Carol is going to touch more on communities of interest and just what constitutes a fair map and what it means for people to use their voice and for their voices to be heard, is when we talk about communities of interest, we are talking about communities with common interests that should be in one political district, right? And that a community of interest can be constituted by income, education, language, cultural ancestry. It could be geographic. It could be school boundaries or the way we think about schooling, et cetera. So a community of interest is a very broad term that can be defined by a specific community given their collective interest in being in one specific political district together. And why this is important, and here's the tres leches que Carol was mentioning, is because redistricting is essentially like cutting up a cake, right? Slicing up a cake. We were through the process of reapportionment, which was mentioned by Mike earlier, right? We know, for example, that because of reapportionment, we have an allotted amount of congressional seats. We have a specific amount of state house and state senate seats for the assembly, et cetera. And so the way this happens, the way that redistricting process occurs is the people who are in charge of this process at the statewide level. It's of course the commission, both the House and the Senate. And for Congress, it's the legislature. Right. And so what they do is they essentially cut up this cake, right, into different political districts. And the reason it's important for people to kind of advocate for their communities is because I don't know about you all, but I love tres leches cake, right? And when I go to a party and they're offering this kind of cake, I want to make sure that I get a whole peach, right? Or I want to make sure that I get two peaches, two slices of the same fruit, right? Because I like peach. I don't like strawberry. I don't like kiwi. It's the same thing when we're talking about redistricting. When you are slicing up this cake, if your community is made up of these metaphorical peaches, then you want that slice of peach, right? You want your entire district to be all peaches. Likewise, if your specific identity or your language is represented by kiwi, you want that slice of kiwi, right? You don't want half a kiwi. You don't want your community of kiwis to be split in half. You want the entire slice of kiwi when you are getting this cake. Or if, for example, this metaphorical strawberry represents your community of interest, which is maybe that most of your community works at a factory, right? And this represents the strawberry, then again, you want the group of strawberries to remain whole in one specific slice of cake. You don't want the half of the strawberry and half of the kiwi, right? That's going to be a funky flavor. You want the entire cake, slice of cake, to be one specific fruit or a group of the same fruit. So anyway, that's redistricting in kind of in a nutshell. And I think it's incredibly important to think about it in terms of food, right? Because everyone, if there's like a universal language in the world, it definitely has something to do with food. And at the fundamental level, of course, it's easy for people to digest, if I will. And here, the importance of redistricting, as was mentioned earlier by Isabel, Mike, and Patricia, redistricting is directly linked to funding, right? And how we are going to divvy up the amount of money that we have allocated for our specific municipality, our county, et cetera, right? And this is incredibly important. Why? Because we want to make sure that our students are learning in a school that is well-maintained, in a school that has state-of-the-art technology, in a school that receives funding so the textbooks can be consistently updated, right? As opposed to a rundown school with trailers, as opposed to a rundown school with only one janitor, as opposed to a rundown school where we can't get teachers to be in that school, et cetera. And that's extremely important, why we must engage in the process and why we need to advocate for fair maps in redistricting. I myself, for example, before entering this space, this redistricting space, I was an 8th grade math teacher. And it's incredibly hurtful for me to share that on my first day on the job, when I entered my classroom, it was a trailer built by prisoners. And on this trailer, I had a chalkboard. There was no teacher's desk on my first day. I had no technology really my entire first year teaching. And I was teaching a group of mostly students of color and migrant students. And so, of course, like that was incredibly impactful for me in understanding that this is an incredibly consequential process that not only impacts us as adults or people who vote or people who are directly engaged civically, this impacts every single person who resides in every single community across America. This impacts our 8-year-old kids today, that the next time this process happens, this 8-year-old child is going to be 18 years old. That is a huge developmental period where this student will either receive fair political representation, where this student will in theory be inspired by the civic engagement of the community, or where this student is going to receive the proper resources in their schooling, right? Or it's 10 years of the opposite of that. But keep in mind, this is incredibly consequential because it's happening now and it won't happen again until 2031, right? 10 years from now. That's a very long time. And why it's important also, again, about this idea of representation that Carol, I'm confident will talk more about, is that when you have a community of interest, when you have a fair map, right, then you ultimately have a map where your representative is going to be able to fight for you, where your representative is going to know your community specifically and is going to be able to advocate for you, where your representative is going to talk about the funding that you need. Your representative is going to talk about the infrastructure in your town that needs to be revamped. They're going to talk about the needs of your specific community and fight for your specific community. That's why redistricting is extremely important, and that's why advocating and helping and supporting the drawing of fair maps is extremely important. And of course, there are many ways to participate in the process, right? And one of the most impactful ways as community members is to talk with each other about what this means and about how impactful it can be for the children of the community, right? There are opportunities to let your voice be heard about your community through the commission as well as the legislature. And finally, of course, you can always call, regardless of the process, redistricting or policy, whatever it is, you can always call your representative and ask them to fight for your community and advocate for fair maps. With that, of course, if there are any questions, Judith, or follow-ups, I'm happy to answer. But otherwise, of course, Carol can talk about what constitutes a fair map.
You had one slide that I didn't see, and thank you, Tony, because I was just going to do the chat and say we do need to move to, so we have time for Carol. But you had a slide that showed different ways with pictures of profiles of people on it, and showed how if you cut them one way, you had like one person who might be a minority in each of 4 districts, or you could do the district. That might be a helpful visual clue for people. Is that one handy?
Yeah, if you give me, yep, if you give me a second here, I can pull that slide up in a second.
Well, he's looking for it. Let me say that this is what a fair map is. It's a map that allows representation for communities. And so as the Latino community has grown in Reading and in Pennsylvania, it's important that our new maps be drawn in a way that the Latino community gets a larger voice. Right now, there are 4 Hispanic representatives in our House of Representatives. That's a small number given the population, and there has not been a Latino senator in Pennsylvania to date. So the Senate has no voices from the Latino community. So as we look at maps, one question is, do our maps give our minority communities, our Black and Brown communities, an adequate voice? Are our communities heard in Harrisburg? And are our urban communities given an adequate voice compared to our rural communities? Are the needs of all Pennsylvanians being heard well in our legislative process? So this really does say it really well, because maps can be drawn to pack all of one kind of person in one district, and then have the other districts have the fuller say. And you might say, oh, well, this district is good because this district looks like me. But then if you have a tiny voice compared to your population, then that's not a fair map. So what we would say in terms of a fair map is a map needs to represent its community, but statewide, the overall map needs to represent the needs of the overall state in a way that reflects the population of the state. And we have a real problem with that in Pennsylvania. And if you look at the way that Berks has been drawn in past maps, the congressional map of 2011, our House and Senate maps. Senate has not been so bad for Reading, but the House map has not necessarily represented the city well, and certainly has not represented the Latino community across the state particularly well. And so as we look at maps, that's one of the questions that we're looking at. And another one is it drawn to reflect the geography of your area? Is it drawn to be fairly compact so you actually know how to get to your legislator? Is it drawn in a way that you can organize, that you know what your community is, and you could actually organize and help somebody's campaign? There's been some conversation about the 222 corridor. I don't know if that's something that any of you want to comment on, but as Fair Districts PA has been drawing some citizen maps. And in doing that, we reached out to community leaders all across the state to say, what do we need to know? I don't live in your community. What do I need to know about how best to represent your community? And folks in both Reading and Allentown said, you need to know about the 222 corridor, and you need to think carefully as that corridor grows, which is, the kind of Latino population growing in Pennsylvania. As that population grows, the maps need to be drawn, not in a way that chops that into little pieces so that corridor has no say, but drawn in a way that as that corridor grows, that voice becomes increasingly strong and has a real say in what happens in your region. It can be a huge economic driver for the region as populations grow, but it needs policy to support that. And those policies will only happen to support that if there's good representation. So I'm going to share is it okay to share just a couple slides about kind of where we are in the process, just to kind of give you an idea of what's happening, because it's happening right now. And there was an article last January that said redistricting will be the definitive political fight of 2021 in Pennsylvania. And that is the case. And it's something that many people don't understand. People may not be paying attention, but whether you're paying attention or not, this will shape Pennsylvania politics and policy and funding and education and all kinds of other things for the next decade. And so it's really important to understand what's happening and to participate if you can. So for House and Senate maps, those are representation in Harrisburg. There's 5 people who will draw the maps. Kim Ward, Senator Ward, is the majority leader in the Senate. Senator Jay Costa is the minority leader in the Senate. Representative Carrie Benninghoff is the majority leader in the House. And Representative Joanna McClinton is the minority leader in the House. And for the first time ever, there are 2 women Every time in the past in Pennsylvania this has been done, it's been 5 white men. So this is a huge new thing that we have 2 women on this commission and a person of color. So that's terrific. Another thing that's really good is the chair is selected by the majority of the Supreme Court and often has a real partisan lean. This chair, Mark Nordenberg, has done his best to signal in every way he can that he intends to do it in a more fair way, a more transparent way. And one of the transparent ways is there is a website where you can offer testimony. So you could go on there this evening if you want, and you could say, when you map Reading, think about this. This is what we want. When you map Berks, think about this. So you can go online and offer testimony. You can actually draw your own map and put it online. You can create a map of just your own districts for your own county and share that. All of that is happening right now. I'm actually going to be giving testimony in front of this commission on Monday about our Fair Districts PA People's Maps. So for congressional districts, it's done differently, and that's for representation in Congress. It's a bill passed in the General Assembly and signed by the governor. And the 2 committee chairs who are responsible for this are Representative Seth Grove. He's the chair of the House committee that's working on this, and Senator David Argel, who is part of his district is part of Berks County. And those 2 are working on this. Senator Argel has said Schuylkill County should never be divided. He's made a real point of that. And in fact, there was a letter to the editor in the Pottsville Republican Herald just last week where he took to task somebody who liked our map because our map was very carefully constructed for that 2-2 corridor, which meant that Schuylkill County actually had to be divided in the Senate map, which made him very angry. And the question is, why should your county never be divided when Berks has been hacked into pieces year after decade after decade? So it's an interesting question. A good thing for the congressional districts is that it's passed as a bill, but the governor can sign or veto it. And he has selected a redistricting advisory council, which will look at the map that's proposed. And if it's not a good map or a fair map, he's going to veto it. And another good thing was the league lawsuit that happened 2 years ago that said the previous congressional districts were unlawful and gave us the new districts. There's some legal precedent now that will really help us as we go into this redistricting cycle. It's happening right now. As I said, the data was certified 2 weeks ago. The Legislative Reapportionment Commission has 90 days, but they say they're going to have a map by the end of November. Then there's 30 days for public review, 30 days for appeal, and then the maps are supposed to be ready for candidates to file nomination petitions by January 24th. So the next couple of months are going to be really important. The congressional districts, they have not said anything about a timeline, but we do know once they come out with a map, Governor Wolf has 10 days to sign it, and they have the same deadline of January 24th. So a lot happening. I'm not going to talk about the prison gerrymandering question, except simply to say that that is one win that we've had here in Pennsylvania of reallocating people who are incarcerated back to their home communities. And I will say that the next few months, really the next few weeks, will shape Pennsylvania maps and politics and policy for the next decade. So I really encourage you to look at our website because we've got a ton of information. We've got links to our people's maps. And if you join us, you'll get emails from us telling you when there's ways to engage, when there's new maps to look at, when you can see the proposed maps for your own community. So that's happening now, but look at fairdistrictspa.com and look for that join us button. And I will stop, and Judith can tell us where we go next.
Well, I just have more questions. And I think it's important that everybody knows that while we've been talking about minority populations, and particularly the Latino population, in Berks County, it seems to me we have every Spanish-speaking country on the globe represented somewhere among our citizenry. Latinos are not all coming from the same place. They're all very different. They have different political ideas. So we're not talking about a monolith in any way, shape, or form. Likewise, we have Black people from all over the globe. We had a diversity day in the city park not very long ago, and I met people from countries I've only dreamed of visiting, and it was nice to have that connect and talk with them. so we have we're diverse beyond the fact of beyond the labels. So I think one of the things that happens with the legislators, and you're right, they've been mostly white men. We have very few even female representatives in our state legislature, and yet women make up more than half the population. And we know that women don't all think alike. So there tends to be a sense that if we expand and create this diversity, somebody will take over. But that, I don't think there's any history that happens. I think what has happened is people guarantee that they will be reelected and reelected and reelected. And one of the things that happens then is they end up speaking to the people who most think like they do. And then we have less compromise. We used to have a legislature that could compromise, and that seems to be gone. Now, Mike, you're at the county level, and all the commissioners, at least in this threesome, seem to get along and are more worried about good governance than they are about political whatevers. Is that how you would see it?
I would say that, yes.
And that's the way government is supposed to operate.
In theory.
And when in theory, yes. I mean, people will have differences, but there has to be that compromise. So when you have a district that is of mixed people and a legislator has to represent all of them, in my mind, you're going to more likely get compromise and get needs met. Is that anyone else's thinking, or is that just me?
Well, I would say the goal is to draw districts that reflect communities well, but to draw the map for the state in a way that no one party can grab control and shut the other party out completely. And what we've seen for 40 years, we had 20 years of Democrats controlling everything and shutting Republicans out pretty well. And then we've had 20 years of Republicans controlling everything and shutting the Democrats out really well. And less than 7% of bills introduced in Harrisburg pass. For Democratic legislators, less than 1% of the bills that pass are from Democrats. So a tiny, tiny fraction. It's a very rare Democratic legislator who gets a bill even to get a vote in committee. That is a party if a Democratic legislator can get a vote in committee. So what we want is a legislation that every legislator has a chance to get their bills heard, and where those bills get a vote, and where all the legislators are not saying, my party says do this, where everybody's saying, would that serve my community well? And if it does, I'm going to vote for it. And we know there are some legislators who do that, who just vote for it because it serves their constituents, but most of them do what the party leaders tell them to. And most good bills don't ever even come to a vote. And that's what we need to see change. And having better representation is going to change that.
And I think Tony's, oh, go ahead.
Yep, real quick about representation also. Recognize that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act specifically protects minority voters and people who are a part of a language minority group. And so anyway, like all that to say, of course, is that there are protections for folks, and Section 2 specifically states that it should give people of color the opportunity to elect a candidate of their choosing. So as you were saying, Judith, it's not a monolith, right? Like sometimes Latinos prefer Republicans, and that's fine, but that means that when they are protected, they must have the opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice.
Okay, we have about 1 minute left, so we're ready for anybody's closing comment. Patricia, Isabel, Michael?
Well, I just wanted to add to what Isabel said earlier. I think it would be a good approach altogether to start the census awareness campaigns early. Yes, there is a little bit of disinformation and misinformation for some individuals, but there's also a lot of lack of trust. So we need to get involved earlier. Everyone in our communities overall, but most importantly, our leadership. We need to make sure the leadership gets the word across, because ultimately, with your census participation, you can have the right representation and you can have the right level of funding for different areas in your communities.
So I think does anybody else have just a quick closing comment? I don't want to cut anyone off, but
This process is actually beginning in the city of Reading for city council districts. On the last Monday, city council appointed a redistricting committee who has 120 days to potentially redraw city council districts. So it is local, it's not just statewide.
So the point is we need to constantly be working to build confidence in a government, to help people understand that this government is theirs if they are active in it, and they can make a difference and have the responsibility to make it work for all our communities. This is in League of Women Voters Presents. We've been talking about the census, how it impacts us, how it impacts the money we're going to get, how it impacts the representation we get in both our State House of Representatives and Senate, and in our federal and our Congress and federal Senate. And all those also affect the funding we will get. It all comes down to those dollars. So thank you to all the guests. It's been a pleasure having you. And I think we're going to need a second and a third and a fourth conversation. This is just so much to talk about and so much we need to do to keep this in front of people so they understand and they participate to make it their lives better. Thank you and good night.